At 1 in the morning, I found my 8-year-old son tied to a fence in the middle of a cemetery, and the person watching him from the shadows was my own sister. How does a family fall so far that blood becomes something you fear instead of trust? My name is Alicia. I'm 32 years old, a working mom, and until that night, I still believed that no matter how complicated relatives could be, family would never truly hurt a child. I used to think betrayal belonged in movies, in other people's tragedies, in headlines you shake your head at before going back to your life. I was wrong. What I'm about to tell you is the story of the longest night of my life, the night my understanding of love, loyalty, and motherhood was ripped apart and rebuilt into something harder, colder, but unbreakable. It started with what was supposed to be a surprise. I had been away on a short business trip. Nothing dramatic, just a few exhausting days of meetings and hotel coffee. I finished earlier than expected and managed to catch a late flight home, arriving 2 days before anyone thought I would be back. On the plane, somewhere above the clouds, I kept picturing Austin's face when I walked through the door. He always ran toward me full speed, like a tiny missile of joy. Every time I returned from a trip, he acted as if I'd crossed oceans for years instead of days. He'd bury his face in my coat and talk a mile a minute, telling me everything I'd missed. I lived for that. So as I drove home from the airport, tired but smiling, I imagined the reunion over and over. Maybe he'd already be asleep, and I'd kiss his forehead. Maybe he'd wake up and blink at me, confused, before realizing Mom was home early. I even rehearsed how quietly I'd roll my suitcase down the hallway. I wanted magic. But sometimes life hands you something else entirely. The house greeted me with darkness. Not unusual. It was late. But the silence, it felt dense, like it had weight. Usually there was some hum television left on low, the refrigerator clicking, Austin mumbling in his sleep. Something alive. Instead, it felt staged. I set my suitcase down by the door and called softly, already smiling. Austin? Baby? Nothing. I kicked off my shoes and moved toward his room, heart fluttering with anticipation. The door was cracked open. A thin line of light from the hallway slipped across his floor. Austin? I whispered again. I pushed the door, and my smile faded. His bed was made, not messy like a child had rolled out of it, not twisted from sleep. It was flat, tucked, almost careful. His favorite dinosaur, the one he refused to sleep without, was propped against the pillow like a display. I stood there longer than I should have, my brain trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Maybe Mom took him somewhere, I thought. Maybe there was a change of plans. Maybe. But she would have told me, right? A strange, thin thread of unease began tightening in my chest. I checked the bathroom. Empty. Kitchen. Empty. Living room. Empty. Each step made the house feel bigger, colder. The air conditioner hummed loudly, suddenly the only proof that anything still functioned. I pulled out my phone and called the person who should have had the answer immediately. My mother. She picked up quickly. Almost too quickly. Alicia, honey, she said, voice smooth, awake. You're home already? Her knowing I was home made my stomach dip. I hadn't told anyone I changed my flight. Where is Austin? I asked. There was the tiniest pause. So small, most people wouldn't notice. But I did. Oh, she replied. Light, casual. He's sleeping at Brenda's. They planned a little sleepover. Something fun tomorrow. For a second, I couldn't speak. Because my sister Brenda didn't do sleepovers? Brenda didn't even like children. She tolerated Austin at holidays the way people tolerate loud music from a neighbor, tight smile, limited patience, relief when it ended. She had never, not once, invited him into her house overnight. Put him on the phone, I said. Alicia, don't be ridiculous, my mother sighed. It's late. He's asleep. A pressure started building behind my eyes. Mom, I tried again, slower this time. Since when does Brenda host sleepovers? Another pause. Longer. Well, people change, she answered, and I could almost hear her shrug. You worry too much. Worry too much. Maybe she meant it to calm me. Instead, it did the opposite. Because a mother's fear is not a switch you turn off with reassurance. It is an alarm wired directly to the soul, and mine had just started screaming. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. My hands were already moving, opening the tracking app connected to Austin's smartwatch. We'd bought it for emergencies, never truly believing we'd need it. The screen loaded painfully slowly. I held my breath. Then the map appeared. A small blue dot blinked to life. I expected to see Brenda's street. Instead, the dot pulsed somewhere else entirely. Far across town, in a place surrounded by empty land and narrow roads and rows of names carved into stone, the city cemetery. I stared at it, convinced I was misreading the map. I zoomed in, out, in again. No mistake. My son was there, alone. At 1 a.m, a cold wave swept through my body so violently I had to grab the counter to stay upright. There had to be an explanation, something reasonable, something that did not involve terror. But deep down, in that primitive place where mothers recognize danger before proof, I knew. Something was very wrong. I grabbed my keys, and as I ran for the door, one thought pounded in my head louder than anything else. If he is scared, please let me get there in time. I don't remember locking the door behind me. I don't remember the cold night air or how my feet carried me to the car. What I remember is the blue dot, that small, pulsing signal on my phone that told me my son was somewhere no child should ever be, sitting in the dark among the dead while the rest of the world slept peacefully in their beds. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before getting the engine started. My breath came fast, shallow, scraping at my throat like broken glass. I told myself to think, to slow down, to find logic in this madness. Maybe the watch had malfunctioned. Maybe someone drove past the cemetery. Maybe. But the dot wasn't moving. It stayed there, stubborn and bright, like a lighthouse guiding me straight toward disaster. I pressed the gas pedal harder than I ever had in my life. Streetlights blurred into yellow streaks. Stop signs became suggestions. Every second stretched, elastic and cruel. My heart kept trying to crawl out of my chest as images forced themselves into my mind. Austin crying, Austin calling for me, Austin wondering why I wasn't there. "I'm coming," I whispered into the empty car. "Mommy's coming, baby. Hold on." The cemetery sat on the far edge of town, away from neighborhoods, away from noise, surrounded by fields and old trees that swallowed moonlight. People joked about it during Halloween, told stories about ghosts and shadows. But there is nothing funny about a graveyard when your child is inside it. The iron gates appeared ahead of me, tall and black, half swallowed by fog. My headlights washed over the wooden sign bearing the cemetery's name, and for one insane moment I hoped the GPS would change, that the dot would jump somewhere else and prove I had imagined everything. It didn't. I turned into the gravel entrance too fast, tires skidding, stones exploding under the wheels. The sound shattered the silence of the night, loud and violent, like an intrusion into a sacred place. I left the engine running, left the door wide open. I ran. Cold air tore into my lungs. The damp earth sucked at my shoes. I tripped over something, maybe a root, maybe a fallen marker, and barely caught myself. My phone trembled in my hand as I followed the arrow, weaving between rows of headstones that leaned like crooked teeth. Every shadow looked like a person. Every tree seemed to breathe. I could hear the wind dragging through the branches, whispering over granite and marble, and beneath it all, I kept hearing something else. My own heartbeat. Too fast. Too loud. Then the arrow on the screen told me I was close. I lifted my head, and I saw him. For a moment, my mind refused to accept the shape in front of me. It tried to turn it into something harmless, a pile of trash, a statue, anything other than what it truly was. But a mother knows her child, even in silhouette. Austin was sitting on the ground beside a rusted iron fence near a massive oak tree. His knees were pulled tight to his chest, shoulders curled inward, the way he did when he was afraid of thunder. Except tonight, he wasn't in his warm bedroom. He was outside, in the cold, alone. Rope wrapped around his small body, pinning him in place. 2 suitcases stood upright next to him, absurd and obscene, like someone had packed him for a trip he never agreed to take. My legs nearly gave out. I tasted metal in my mouth, sharp and electric. A roaring filled my ears so heavy it muffled the world. and then I saw the tape across his mouth. My son tried to make a sound when he noticed me. His eyes widened so suddenly they seemed to shine in the dark. Tears were already frozen along his cheeks, catching the faint light from my car behind me. Relief, terror, hope, all of it hit me at once. "I'm here," I shouted, though I didn't know if he could understand me. "Mommy's here." I started toward him, and that's when I noticed we weren't alone. A glow pulsed to the left of the oak tree, soft, orange, alive. I turned. A car sat parked in the shadows, angled like it had been waiting comfortably for some time. Leaning against the hood, ankles crossed, posture relaxed, was a figure I recognized instantly. Brenda. My sister held a cigarette between her fingers, the ember flaring each time she inhaled. Smoke curled lazily around her face. She looked like someone enjoying a quiet break, not like a woman who had delivered a child into terror. She watched me run toward my son, and she smiled. Not nervously, not apologetically, but with satisfaction, as if everything was unfolding exactly the way she wanted. My stomach twisted. I wanted to scream at her, to demand explanations, to ask what kind of monster she thought she was, but words felt useless, fragile, too small for what she had done. I dropped to my knees in front of Austin instead. Up close, I could see how badly he was shaking. The rope had rubbed his wrists raw. His lips were pale, almost blue. His breath came in tiny bursts through his nose, panicked and desperate. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice breaking apart. "Oh, baby." I peeled the tape from his mouth as gently as I could, but he still cried out at the sting. The sound that came from him wasn't just fear, it was release, the kind that happens when someone finally believes they might survive. "Mom," he sobbed, collapsing toward me as far as the rope would allow. I was so scared. I pressed my forehead to his. I know, I've got you." Behind me, I heard the slow crunch of footsteps on gravel. Brenda approaching. She flicked her cigarette onto the ground near us, grinding it out with the toe of her shoe like punctuation. "You're being dramatic," she said coolly. He needed to learn something. I turned toward her, disbelief flooding every inch of me. "Learn what?" I demanded. She gestured toward the suitcases, toward the darkness, toward the helpless child trembling in my arms. "That life isn't always comfortable," she replied. "Maybe now you'll finally stop hiding behind him and start thinking about selling the house." There it was, the house. Even in this moment, with Austin shaking so violently I could barely untie the knots, she was still thinking about money, about property, about what she believed she deserved. Something ancient and feral rose inside me then, pushing past exhaustion and fear. I felt it settle into my bones like armor, because whatever happened next, she was never going to touch my child again. Not while I was breathing. I wish I could tell you I handled what happened next with dignity. I wish I could say I stayed calm, that I spoke in measured sentences, that I tried one last time to reach whatever humanity might have been left inside my sister. But the truth is far simpler. I stopped being her sister, and I became a mother. The rope was rough under my fingers, stiff from damp night air, biting into Austin's wrists as I tried to work the knots loose. My hands were shaking, clumsy, refusing to cooperate. Every second I fumbled felt like a betrayal of him. Behind me, Brenda let out an irritated sigh, as if my panic inconvenienced her. "You're overreacting," she said again. "I wasn't going to leave him here forever. Forever." The word rang in my skull. "How long is acceptable to you?" I shot back, not even turning around. "An hour? 2? Until he stops crying? Until I agree to sign something?" Austin pressed himself against me, fingers clawing into my jacket. His entire body trembled with leftover terror, tiny aftershocks running through him. "She said you needed to understand," he whispered, voice cracking. "She said if I was brave, you'd finally listen." My vision blurred. She used him, not just as bait, as a messenger, a tool. I finally ripped one knot apart, then another, the fibers burning my skin. I pulled him into my arms, wrapping myself around him like I could build a wall out of bone and blood. "It's over," I murmured into his hair. "I've got you. Nobody's taking you anywhere." The crunch of footsteps came faster now. Brenda was done observing, done pretending she was reasonable. She grabbed my shoulder and tried to yank me back. "Don't act like I'm the villain," she snapped. "You're the one tearing this family apart." Something in me flipped. I rose to my feet so quickly she stumbled back in surprise. Maybe she expected tears. Maybe she expected pleading. What she got instead was fury sharpened into clarity. I shoved her. Hard. She hit the side of her car with a dull thud. More shocked than hurt. For a split second, we just stared at each other, breathing fast. Years of history crackling in the air between us. "You tied up my son," I said, each word carved from ice. She lunged for my hair. Instinct took over. I grabbed her wrists, twisted, pushed her down into the wet grass. She cursed, struggling, but adrenaline had turned my muscles into steel cables. I didn't recognize myself. I didn't care. All I knew was distance. "Keep her away from Austin." She spat at me. "Dad would be ashamed of you." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Dad, the man who had quietly changed his will years ago because he had seen exactly what Brenda was capable of long before I wanted to admit it. "You don't get to say his name," I replied. I turned my back on her then, because she was no longer the priority. Austin was. I dropped beside him again, working at the last of the rope, whispering nonsense comfort words that probably made no sense but carried the only message that mattered. I am here. I am not leaving. And then the night exploded in color. Blue, red, flashing across the tombstones, reflecting in puddles, slicing through darkness like judgment itself. Sirens wailed as patrol cars tore through the cemetery gates. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Brenda's expression shifted from anger to disbelief, like she truly hadn't considered consequences, like she thought I would handle this privately, quietly, obediently. Family first. Family above the law. But she had crossed a line that erased those rules. Officers rushed toward us, boots pounding, voices commanding. "Step away from her. Hands where we can see them." I pulled Austin tighter to my chest and raised one arm, trying to show them who I was, who the victim was, terrified of some horrible misunderstanding. "She tied him up," I cried. "That's my son." 2 officers grabbed Brenda, forcing her face down into the grass. She screamed in outrage, thrashing like she had been betrayed. "You called the cops?" she shrieked at me. "On your own sister?" "Yes, I had, and I would do it again." Officer Miller, his name tag caught the light, knelt beside us, eyes softening when he saw Austin's condition. He spoke gently, professionally, cutting through chaos. "Ma'am, we've got her. You're safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign. They wrapped Austin in a thermal blanket someone pulled from a cruiser. He clung to me so tightly I could barely breathe, burying his face in my neck, sobs finally breaking free now that survival seemed possible. I rocked him, whispering, while Brenda continued shouting from the ground. "She abandoned him. She makes me the bad one." "You're ruining my life." I didn't respond. Because arguing with someone who believes they are the victim of their own cruelty is like screaming into a storm. They pulled her up, cuffed her hands behind her back. The metal clicked shut, final and undeniable. For the first time that night, she looked small, not powerful, not clever, just cornered. And as they led her toward the patrol car, she twisted around to glare at me with a hatred so old it felt fossilized. "This isn't over," she promised. But I looked down at Austin, at the tear tracks on his cheeks, at the way his fingers refused to release my coat. Oh, it was. It might take time, paperwork, courtrooms, more pain. But the illusion that she could terrorize us without consequence had just died among the graves. I carried my son toward the ambulance, legs trembling now that the danger had shifted away from immediate survival. My body was starting to understand what it had endured. Shock crept in at the edges. Exhaustion. Rage waiting for somewhere to land. As the paramedics checked his temperature and asked careful questions, I watched the patrol car door slam shut on Brenda. And instead of triumph, What I felt was something heavier: grief. Because the sister I once knew, or maybe the sister I wished I had, was gone. In her place stood someone capable of using a child as leverage. Someone I would spend the rest of my life defending my son against. Austin's small hand found mine again. "Mom," he whispered, voice hoarse, "are we going home?" I kissed his forehead. "Not yet," I said softly, "but we're going somewhere safe." And as the ambulance doors closed, carrying us away from the cemetery, I realized something I could never unlearn. The real battle had only just begun. Hospitals have a strange way of making everything feel suspended, like the world outside has been placed on pause while you sit under fluorescent lights and wait to find out how badly your life has changed. The sirens were gone. The shouting was gone. Even the cemetery felt far away, but my son was still shaking. Austin lay in a narrow hospital bed wrapped in layers of warmed blankets, a tiny oxygen monitor clipped to his finger, the steady rhythm of machines filling the room. Every now and then his eyelids fluttered and his body jerked as if he were falling. "Trauma does that," the nurse explained gently. "Sometimes the fear keeps running long after the danger has passed. Mild hypothermia," the doctor told me. "We caught it in time." "In time?" I nodded as if I could absorb those words and store them somewhere safe, but my chest still felt hollow. I sat beside him and held his hand, rubbing slow circles against his skin the way I used to when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. "I'm here," I kept whispering, over and over, even when he drifted into a restless sleep. I should have felt relief. Instead, a new dread began to creep in, colder and more complicated than the graveyard, because Brenda hadn't done this alone. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept replaying my mother's voice on the phone. Calm, controlled, certain. "He's at your sister's. Don't wake him." I had grown up trusting that voice. It had tucked me in, kissed my scraped knees, told me monsters weren't real. Tonight, it had delivered my child into one. The door burst open without a knock. I flinched, heart leaping into my throat, before I saw her. My mother. Her hair was messy, her coat thrown over her nightclothes, face flushed as if she had run the entire way from the parking lot. For one fragile second, hope flickered inside me. Maybe she had come to apologize. Maybe she had realized how wrong she had been. Maybe she had chosen Austin. But she didn't even look at the bed. Not really. Her eyes locked onto me instead, sharp with accusation, already loaded for battle. "What were you thinking?" she demanded in a harsh whisper. "Calling the police? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I blinked at her. I actually thought I had misheard. "What I've done?" I repeated. She gestured wildly toward the hallway, toward the world, toward consequences that apparently mattered more than the child sleeping 3 feet away. "You humiliated your sister," she hissed. "You turned a family issue into a criminal one." Family issue. My hand tightened around Austin's fingers. "She tied him to a fence," I said, my voice frighteningly calm. "In a cemetery. It was a prank," my mother shot back. "She was trying to scare you, not hurt him." I felt something inside me tilt. A prank. I looked at my son, his pale face, the faint rope marks still visible on his wrists, the way he twitched in his sleep like he was trying to run somewhere his body couldn't reach. "That's your definition of harmless?" I asked. My mother crossed her arms, defensive, irritated that I wasn't immediately surrendering to her version of reality. "You always exaggerate," she said. "You always make Brenda the villain." The unfairness of it nearly stole my breath. Because Brenda had been caught. Because the police had seen. Because the truth was no longer a rumor or a misunderstanding. And still, my mother chose her. I reached slowly into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Listen carefully," I told her. I pressed play. Her voice filled the hospital room, unmistakable, recorded earlier that night. "He's safe. He's sleeping at Brenda's." I watched her face as the lie replayed itself in front of us, expecting shame, horror, at least discomfort. Nothing. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she changed tactics the way she had done my entire life whenever she wanted control. Her anger melted into tears so fast it was almost impressive. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, wringing her hands. "You don't understand what Brenda is going through. She owes money. Terrible people. She's desperate. She thought if you were frightened enough, you'd finally agree to sell the house. There it was. The house. Even here, with Austin hooked to monitors, they were still circling the same prize. So, this was about real estate? I asked, my voice hollow. It's about survival, she insisted. You have everything. Why can't you sacrifice a little to save your sister? Sacrifice. My eyes dropped to Austin again, to the child who had begged me not to leave him alone in the dark. And suddenly, I saw my entire childhood rearrange itself in my memory. Every time Brenda broke something, and I apologized. Every time she shouted and I kept the peace. Every time my mother smoothed it over and asked me to be the bigger person. Be patient. Be understanding. Family first. Family first had almost destroyed my son. A clarity settled over me so sharp it felt like ice water in my veins. I stood. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. No, I said. My mother blinked. No what? No more, I answered. She stared at me, confused, as if I were speaking another language. I pointed toward the door. You need to leave. Her mouth fell open. Alicia, you lied to me, I continued, voice steady. You helped her, and then you came here to tell me it wasn't that bad. You are not safe for my child. Tears streamed down her cheeks now, but they didn't move me the way they once would have. They felt rehearsed, pulled from an old script where I always folded. I'm your mother, she whispered. And I'm his, I replied. For a moment, we simply looked at each other across the ruins of our relationship. Then she tried one last time. You'll regret this, she said softly. Maybe I would. But I knew what I would regret more. Letting her stay. I walked to the door and opened it. A security guard who had been hovering nearby stepped closer, reading the situation instantly. My mother is not allowed back in, I said. She gasped like I had struck her. They guided her into the hallway while she continued crying, calling my name, telling me I was making a mistake. I didn't follow. I closed the door. The latch clicked into place, small but final. When I turned back toward the bed, my knees nearly gave out from the weight of it all. I returned to my chair and took Austin's hand again. He stirred slightly, eyes half opening. Mom? He murmured. I'm here, I whispered, brushing hair from his forehead. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I understood something with brutal certainty. I hadn't just lost a sister tonight. I had lost a mother too. But if that was the price of keeping my son safe, I would pay it. I didn't sleep. Even after Austin finally settled into a deeper rest and the machines around him softened into a steady rhythm, my mind refused to shut down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same images, the fence, the rope, Brenda's cigarette glowing like a signal flare in the dark. But worse than that, I heard my mother's voice. It's just a prank. The word echoed until it lost meaning. By the time morning came, I wasn't numb anymore. I was awake, clear. And clarity can be terrifying, because once you see the truth, you can't pretend you didn't. David arrived just after sunrise. He had taken the earliest flight he could find after hearing my voicemail, and the moment he walked into the hospital room, the composure I had been forcing on myself cracked. He wrapped his arms around both of us carefully, as if we were made of glass. I felt him breathing against my hair, slow and controlled, but I could sense the rage beneath it. David was not loud when he was furious. He became precise. What do we know? He asked quietly. So I told him everything. The phone call, the lie, the graveyard, my mother defending Brenda. I watched his jaw tighten more with each sentence, watched his eyes move toward Austin, memorizing the marks on his skin. When I finished, he nodded once. Okay, he said. Then we deal with facts. Facts. I hadn't realized how badly I needed that word. By late afternoon, the doctors released Austin with strict instructions: observation, warmth, and a follow-up with a child trauma specialist. He barely spoke on the ride home, just held my hand in the back seat like if he let go, something might reach in and take him again. The house looked different when we pulled into the driveway. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a crime scene. Sarah was already waiting for us with groceries and quiet strength. She hugged me longer than usual, then crouched to Austin's level and spoke gently about cartoons and pancakes, and anything that wasn't fear. While she settled with him in the living room, David turned to me. "Let's check the cameras," he said. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect the last fragile pieces of denial. But another part, stronger now, needed to know exactly how deep the betrayal went. Sarah followed us into the office, but stopped me before I sat down. "You should look at the porch," she murmured, "and the spare key." My stomach dropped. Only 2 people knew where it was hidden. Me and my mother. David loaded the footage. We watched the timestamp roll backward to the hour before Austin disappeared. There she was. Brenda walked up the path toward our house with infuriating confidence. No hesitation, no fear of being caught. She went straight to the flower pot by the steps and reached underneath. Her hand came back holding the key. I felt something in my chest physically hurt, like a muscle tearing. David exhaled slowly through his nose. "She didn't guess," he said. "She was told." I nodded. There was no room left for doubt. The next part was even worse. Brenda entered the house and didn't go upstairs. She came here, to my office. She opened drawers, rifled through cabinets, yanked folders onto the floor. She wasn't looking for clothes or toys or sentimental things. She was hunting. I moved closer to the screen, my pulse drumming in my ears. "She's looking for paperwork," I whispered. David nodded grimly. "Deed. Estate documents. Anything connected to ownership. My father's will." Of course. When she didn't find what she wanted, she stood still for a moment, thinking, recalculating. Then she went upstairs. To my son. I covered my mouth, horror rising, fresh and raw. She had come prepared to steal first. The kidnapping had been plan B. Sarah made a small, broken sound behind us. We kept watching. 30 minutes later, the camera showed Brenda dragging Austin outside, his body limp with sleep and confusion. I turned away. I couldn't watch my child being taken from his own home. But David kept going. "Wait," he said suddenly. "Go forward, after the cemetery." We scanned through later footage from when police had already removed her. That's when he noticed it. A handbag on the kitchen chair. Designer. Expensive. Careless. She must have forgotten it in the chaos. David retrieved it, like it might explode. We emptied the contents across the table. Bills spilled out in thick stacks, final notice stamped in angry red. Envelopes from casinos, letters from lenders with language that grew more threatening the further we read. There were handwritten calculations too, scribbled on scraps of paper. Estimated sale price of our house. Market comparisons. Potential split. I felt sick. "She needed a payout," I murmured. David's hand slammed against the table, the sound cracking through the room. "She was going to scare you into selling," he said. "She thought if Austin felt unsafe here, you'd run." And the cruel brilliance of it made me shiver, because it might have worked. If she hadn't underestimated one thing, a mother's instinct to fight. I gathered the papers slowly, stacking them with shaking hands. "This goes to the detective," I said. David met my eyes. "Yes," he agreed, "and the prosecutor." Because this wasn't family drama anymore. This was conspiracy, breaking and entering, extortion, premeditation. They hadn't panicked. They had planned. I looked toward the living room where Austin sat, curled beside Sarah, trying to focus on a book, but glancing up every few seconds to make sure I was still there. A fierce calm settled over me. Brenda believed fear would make me surrender. Instead, it had made me dangerous. I picked up my phone, and for the second time in less than 24 hours, I chose a path that would change my family forever. I called the lawyer. I used to believe that once the police got involved, the nightmare would begin to untangle. That evidence would speak. That facts would protect us. That reasonable people, once presented with the truth, would stand on the side of a child. I had clearly never been the target of someone desperate enough to rewrite reality. 2 days after Brenda's arrest, my phone started ringing. At first, I thought it was the detective or maybe the attorney returning my calls. But the numbers were unfamiliar, and they kept coming, one after another, like waves hitting a shore that was already eroding. I answered the third call. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years launched into me without even saying hello. How could you do this to your own sister? I felt my spine stiffen. Do what? I asked, even though I already knew. Have her arrested. Over a misunderstanding. She's saying you exaggerated everything because you want the house money. The house. Always the house. I hung up. More calls followed. Text messages, voicemails, accusations wrapped in concern, threats disguised as advice. Some people tried to sound neutral, but I could hear it in their voices they had already chosen a side. And it wasn't mine. By evening, I learned the final, devastating detail. My mother had bailed Brenda out. Every penny she had saved for retirement, gone in a single signature. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that information while David paced the room, running his hands through his hair. She's going to escalate, he said quietly. He wasn't guessing. He knew Brenda the way you know a storm is coming, by the pressure in the air. She can't afford to lose now, he continued. If she goes down, everything she sacrificed becomes meaningless. I nodded. Desperation makes people reckless, and reckless people are dangerous. The harassment moved quickly from private to public. Jackson isn't a big city. News travels faster than verification, and gossip spreads like it's doing a public service. My mother and Brenda took full advantage of that. They went everywhere. Church groups, coffee shops, the pharmacy, anywhere people would listen. And they told a story where I was cruel, greedy, dramatic, a sister who staged hysteria to keep an inheritance, a daughter who sent her own blood to jail. It didn't matter that police reports existed. It didn't matter that Austin had rope burns. A lie repeated with confidence becomes entertainment, and people love drama more than truth. I began to feel it the next time I stepped outside. A pause in conversation, a glance that lasted too long. Neighbors who used to wave now pretending to check their mail. I kept my head high, but inside, something twisted painfully. These were people who had watched me grow up, who had come to my wedding, who had held my baby. Now, they looked at me like I was capable of monstrous ambition. David wanted me to stay home. I can run errands, he offered. You don't need this. But hiding would have felt like guilt. So, a few days later, I forced myself to go to the supermarket. Nothing dramatic, just milk, bread, normalcy. I needed proof that ordinary life still existed. I was halfway down the frozen aisle when I felt it. That sensation of being watched. I turned, and there they were. Brenda looked thinner already, stretched tight by stress, but her eyes burned with a manic brightness that made my pulse jump. My mother stood slightly behind her, arms folded, expression guarded but determined. They had not stumbled across me. They were waiting. Brenda moved first, placing herself directly in front of my cart. Well, she said loudly, drawing attention like a performer stepping onto a stage. Look who finally decided to show her face. Shoppers slowed. Curious. Hungry. I gripped the handle until my knuckles whitened. Move, I said quietly. Oh, I will, she replied, right after you admit what you did. My mother nodded as if encouraging honesty. Brenda's voice rose another level, sharp enough to echo across the aisle. You lied about me. You twisted everything so you wouldn't have to share Dad's money. A small crowd began to form. Phones appeared. I felt the humiliation crawling up my neck, hot and suffocating. For a second, just a second, I understood why victims stay silent, why it's easier to retreat than to stand in the center of accusation. Then I saw Austin's face in my mind, trembling, alone, trusting me to be brave for him. And something inside me settled. I stepped forward until Brenda had to lean back to keep distance between us. You want the truth? I asked, my voice carrying farther than I expected. She smiled, certain she was winning. Yes, she said, so I gave it to her. The truth, I announced, loud enough for everyone within earshot, is that you tied an 8-year-old child to a fence in a cemetery at 1 a.m. The effect was immediate. Gasps rippled outward. Someone whispered, "What?" Brenda's smile faltered. I kept going. The police found him there, cold, bound, crying. And now you want to stand in a grocery store and pretend you're the victim? Silence dropped like a curtain. People weren't curious anymore. They were horrified. Brenda opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her confidence evaporated under the weight of something she couldn't spin away. My mother touched her arm, urging retreat. They turned, moving fast toward the exit while whispers followed them like smoke. I stood there shaking, adrenaline buzzing under my skin, unsure whether I had just protected myself or detonated the next phase of war. Because humiliation doesn't end a person like Brenda. It provokes them. When I got home and told David what happened, he didn't celebrate. He picked up the phone. "We're hiring security," he said. And I knew he was right, because people who lose control of the story often try to seize control in other ways. And deep down, I felt it coming. The storm wasn't over. It was gathering strength. After the supermarket, the air in our house changed. It felt charged, metallic, like the moment right before lightning hits. Nobody said it out loud, but we all knew the same thing. Brenda would not disappear quietly. People like her never do. They escalate. David moved fast. By the end of that week, cameras covered every angle of the property. Motion sensors lined the doors and windows. The old alarm system, the one that screamed and scared burglars away, was replaced with something smarter. Silent. Efficient. It would call the police without announcing it to whoever had made the mistake of coming inside. "A trap doesn't work if the animal hears it snap," David said. I remember looking at him differently in that moment. Not afraid, not angry, just determined. He wasn't hunting revenge. He was building safety. Austin noticed the changes too. He asked why men were installing new panels, why strangers were checking locks, why Dad kept testing codes late at night. "Because we want to feel peaceful again," I told him. He nodded, accepting that, but he started sleeping with his bedroom door open after that. Sometimes I'd wake up and find him standing in the hallway just to make sure we were still there. Trauma leaves echoes. And echoes don't care about restraining orders. A week passed. Then came the storm. Mississippi storms don't arrive politely. They take over the sky, roll thunder across rooftops, drown the world in noise. Rain hammered the windows so hard it blurred the yard into abstract shapes. If someone wanted cover, this was it. I couldn't sleep. David couldn't either. We lay in bed, listening to the weather, both pretending we weren't waiting for something. My nerves buzzed, refusing to settle, as if my body had already sensed movement my eyes couldn't see. Then it happened. A crack. Sharp, violent, glass surrendering. It came from the back of the house. David was upright instantly. So was I. We didn't rush downstairs. That might sound strange, but panic is what Brenda expected from us. Chaos. Mistakes. Instead, David reached for his phone and checked the security feed. The cameras had already switched to night alert mode. There she was, climbing through the broken basement window, soaked by rain, hair plastered to her face, moving fast but with the confidence of someone who believed she had outsmarted everyone. "She thinks we're gone," I whispered. Earlier that week, I had posted photos from Austin's therapy visit out of town, nothing specific, nothing detailed, but enough to suggest we might not be home. Brenda had taken the bait. She moved through the basement with a flashlight, water dripping behind her, shoes leaving dark prints on the floor. She didn't hesitate at intersections. She remembered the layout perfectly. She had been here before. My stomach turned. David zoomed in. "Incoming units are already on their way," he murmured. The silent alarm had done its job the second the glass shattered. Upstairs, Austin slept. I checked his monitor camera, watching his small body rise and fall, praying he would stay in dreams a little longer. Brenda climbed the stairs. She didn't call my name. Didn't check the rooms. She went exactly where greed had always guided her. Our bedroom, the closet, the safe. She dropped to her knees and pulled a crowbar from her bag, hands shaking as she wedged it into the seam. "Come on," she muttered. "Come on." I felt something unexpected watching her. Not fear, pity. Because even now, with police cars closing in, with her freedom hanging by a thread, she still believed money would fix her life. David squeezed my hand. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. We walked down the hall with the officers, who had entered through the front, their steps controlled, professional. They knew exactly where she was. The bedroom lights flipped on, Brenda spun around, blinded, wild, and there we stood. Me, David, two uniformed officers, her exit sealed. For half a second, disbelief froze her face. She looked like a gambler, realizing the last chip had just vanished. Then the rage came. "You set me up!" she screamed. No, she had done that herself. She grabbed the crowbar tighter, and every officer in the room tensed. "Drop it," one commanded. Her chest heaved. Rainwater dripped from her sleeves onto my carpet. And then, like a dam breaking, years of poison spilled out. "I hate you," she shrieked at me. "You always win. Dad gave you everything. I'm the one who struggled. I'm the one who deserved help." The words echoed off the walls, ugly and naked. I thought of my father then, quiet, observant, careful. I remembered the day he updated his will and how tired he had looked. He had known. He had tried to protect us in advance. I stepped forward despite David's grip tightening. "You didn't lose because of me," I said softly. "You lost because you keep choosing shortcuts instead of responsibility." Her face twisted. The officers moved. They forced her down, the crowbar clattering across the floor. Hands wrenched behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut. Again. But this time was different. This time she had violated bail, committed burglary, threatened violence. There would be no easy exit now. As they pulled her to her feet, she stopped fighting. For the first time, she looked tired, small, beaten by her own decisions. They marched her past us, down the hallway she had walked 100 times in childhood, out into the rain where patrol lights painted everything red and blue. I stood in the doorway, heart pounding, watching the car swallow her. David wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "It's over," he said. Maybe legally, he was right. But as thunder rolled across the sky, I knew something else too. Now that Brenda had lost control of intimidation, she had only one weapon left. The courtroom. The courthouse in downtown Jackson had always looked imposing to me, but on the morning of the trial, it felt almost unreal, like something carved out of stone specifically to hold the weight of judgment. I stood at the bottom of the steps with David's hand wrapped tightly around mine, the autumn air cool against my face, and tried to steady the storm inside my chest. Reporters hovered at a distance, not close enough to interfere, but near enough to remind me that what had happened to my son had become public property. I hated that part. Austin's pain wasn't supposed to be a spectacle, but if this was the price of making sure Brenda could never reach him again, I would pay it. We had decided he wouldn't be there. His therapist had been clear no child should relive trauma in a courtroom if it could be avoided. So he stayed with Sarah, safe, distracted, hopefully unaware that the adults were about to dissect the worst night of his life in front of strangers. I inhaled slowly. "For him," David whispered. I nodded. "For him." Inside, everything smelled like old paper and polished wood. People murmured in tight circles, glancing at us with curiosity, sympathy, sometimes uncertainty. My mother sat on a bench near the front, clutching a tissue in both hands. She didn't look at me. I wasn't sure which of us she thought had betrayed the other. Brenda entered with her attorney, wearing pale clothes, hair neatly brushed, expression carefully fragile. If you hadn't known what she'd done, you might have mistaken her for someone already punished by life. But I knew, and so did the prosecution. The defense began by building exactly the picture I expected. Brenda as desperate, Brenda as overwhelmed, Brenda as drowning in debt and mental strain. They used words like cry for help, like misunderstanding, like family conflict blown out of proportion. I felt anger rise, but I forced myself to stay still, because I knew what they didn't. Evidence doesn't blink. When my name was called, my legs felt heavier than they should have, but once I reached the witness stand, something strange happened. I stopped being afraid. I looked at the jurors, ordinary people, parents, grandparents, workers, and I told them what I saw. I told them about the blue dot on the map, about the drive where every second felt like a betrayal, about the way my son's body shook against that fence, about the tape across his mouth. I described Brenda's face in the cigarette glow, calm and certain, as if she were hosting a lesson instead of a crime. The room went quiet, in a way that felt almost sacred. No one interrupted. No one doubted, because truth, when spoken plainly, carries its own gravity. The prosecutor asked if Brenda had shown remorse. I thought about it, about the shouting, about the blame, about her telling me I had ruined her life. No, I answered. The defense declined to cross-examine me. They knew better. Then came the moment that ended everything. The footage, high definition, clear audio, impossible to argue with. The jury watched Brenda crawl through our basement window, watched her run to the safe, and then they heard her. Her voice, hoarse with fury, screaming about how she hated me, how she deserved the house, how she would take what she was owed. I didn't look at her while it played. I looked at the jury. I watched understanding settle into their faces, watched sympathy shift toward Austin, toward the idea of a child used as leverage. When the video ended, the courtroom felt colder, smaller. Brenda's attorney shuffled papers that no longer mattered. Deliberation took less than 2 hours. I barely remember breathing during that time. David held my hand. I counted the ceiling tiles. Somewhere down the hall, a vending machine hummed, like normal life continuing without us. When the jurors returned, I saw it immediately. Finality. The foreperson stood. Guilty, she said. Once, then again, and again. Each count landed like a door closing. Brenda collapsed into her chair, shaking her head, whispering no, as if denial could reverse time. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Your actions, he said firmly, were not born of confusion or temporary panic. They were deliberate. You exploited a child's vulnerability for financial gain and escalated your behavior even after arrest. His words carried years of experience, the exhaustion of seeing the same selfishness dressed up in different excuses. He announced the sentence. Years in state prison. No early release. I felt something inside my chest finally unlock. Behind Brenda, my mother cried out a sharp, broken sound, and someone helped her sit down. I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because if I looked back, I might soften. And softness had almost cost my son everything. Before we were dismissed, the judge addressed one more matter. The grandmother, her lie, the key, her role in allowing access. He granted the restraining order. Permanent. No contact. The word echoed in my mind like a bell ringing through fog. Permanent. When we walked outside, sunlight flooded the steps, brighter than it had any right to be. David pulled me into his arms, and for the first time in months, I felt my muscles release their constant brace. We did it, he whispered. No, Austin did, by surviving, by trusting me to fight. Reporters called questions after us, but their voices felt distant, irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was that when I went home, I could finally tell my son something simple and true. She can't hurt you anymore. That night, after he fell asleep, peaceful for once, I sat alone in the quiet living room and let the silence wash over me. Justice didn't erase the past, but it built a wall between us and it. And for the first time since the cemetery, I believed that wall might actually hold. Some stories leave bruises. Others leave lessons. What you witnessed wasn't just a fight between sisters or a courtroom victory. It was the moment a mother chose protection over tradition, truth over reputation, and her child over blood. The terror of that cemetery night did not end when the handcuffs clicked or when the judge spoke. Healing is slower than justice. Trust rebuilds itself in tiny, fragile steps. But love, the fierce, immovable kind, can build a future even after betrayal burns everything down. If this journey stayed with you, if you felt the fear in the dark and the relief when safety finally arrived, then you understand why these stories matter. They remind us that boundaries are not cruelty, that standing up to toxic family is sometimes the purest form of love, and that courage often looks like a parent refusing to bend. Thank you for walking this road with me. If you want more powerful, emotional stories about resilience, survival, and the hard-won victories that follow unimaginable nights, subscribe to Henji Wie Iyagi. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done to protect your child? I'm listening.